Dricus Du Plessis' journey to UFC champion is a path carved by entertaining fights, but also hateful opposition who can't wait to see his downfall. In the octagon, his awkward fighting style is hard to process, but it's easy to accept him as being a great champion. It's Dricus' out-of-the-octagon antics that have caused fighters to act out of character and have emotional breakdowns. The question remains, how did Dricus get under the skin of his fellow UFC middleweights without actually turning heel? In fact, as he got more witty and increasingly offensive with pre-fights, insults, and banter, he became more likable by fans and leapfrogged his opponents into UFC superstardom. While other fighters had to be diplomatic to avoid offending others and maintain their status, Du Plessis rose to the cream of the crop without having to toe the line of being politically correct. So this is why fighters hate Dricus Du Plessis. Before Dricus even made his UFC debut, his first encounter with hatred came from the mixed martial arts grappling community. While he was shamed for his outdated grappling tactics, Du Plessis' coach understood his functionality of his approach to the ground game.
I think what a lot of people outside South Africa maybe don't realize is just how good Dricus is on the ground.
Although he may not possess the technical skills or attributes that define a traditional grappler, in typical Dricus fashion, he always figures out a way to win, even if it doesn't look pretty. This style completely opposes the clean and technical grappling of the Gracie family, who are one of the most renowned and respected Brazilian jiu-jitsu lineages in combat sports history. They have an extensive resume of winning the biggest jiu-jitsu competitions in the world and even being able to apply their teachings to mixed martial arts.
Undeniably, undisputed, everyone throughout jiu-jitsu. It's very rare that one figure is universally recognized as being the superior product of jiu-jitsu.
The idea of someone like Dricus, without nearly the same grappling credentials or pedigree, entering their jiu-jitsu realm and having success against even one competitor seemed like a long shot.
Similar on the ground, I think people don't necessarily understand just how good he is because he's not a pure grappler necessarily.
But what if I told you that not only did Du Plessis dominate a Gracie grappler, but he destroyed their entire team back to back to back? Confident, outspoken, and at the very least physically imposing, Dricus competed in South Africa for a submission grappling tournament. The Submission Kings tournament welcomes some of the best grapplers in South Africa, but also the entire world. Team Gracie Barra, with the accolades and skill set to back it up, probably favored their chances in this competition, but Dricus had other plans in mind. In what may be one of the most shocking jiu-jitsu performances of all time, the seemingly slow and plodding Du Plessis took on every member of South Africa Gracie Barra consecutively. A physical freak of nature, every competitor on Team Gracie was completely helpless in challenging one of the strongest men now in the UFC. Dominating from top control and resisting submission attempts, no one seemed to have an answer for the pride of South Africa. He made running through the legendary BJJ team gauntlet look easy.
He can hang with the best people with regards to jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, in the world.
Losing a one-on-one grappling matchup can be an easy pill to swallow. For your whole team to lose against one man, that can easily lead to jealousy and envy. The growing animosity for Du Plessis would only grow over his career, and this was especially the case for Britain's top star. There was a time when UK fighter Darren was one of the hottest rising prospects in the UFC. Popular and talented, he quickly grew to be a fan favorite not only among UK fans but UFC enthusiasts worldwide. Unfortunately, he was never quite able to get over the hump and live up to the high expectations set by his fans and the UFC brass. The pressures of being a UFC champion often causes fighters to wilt and begin to doubt themselves. It's no secret that no one likes to be kicked when they are down, especially when dealing with a multitude of personal problems and life issues. However, Dricus slowly became the type of fighter to poke where it hurts the most.
I just had some demons because I know my skill set. I know when I'm sparring all these guys from around the world and when I'm training and when I'm fighting, how good I am, and then just like to be invincible to being basically on the ground is just, it was devastating for me.
Till was fresh off back-to-back losses against the elite of the division and in need of an easier fight to regain his confidence. To help him get back in the winner's column, Till developed a close friendship with training partner and fellow contender Khamzat Chimaev, who, contrary to Till, was very much on the rise into UFC superstardom. Understanding the closeness of their relationship, Du Plessis figured it was appropriate to cause a divide, uplifting Chimaev and shaming Darren for his recent struggles. With the help of Chimaev and others, Darren was ultimately encouraged to keep pushing in his UFC career, but to some people, his relationship with Chimaev seemed more like a publicity stunt than a genuine pairing. Weight and mental health issues can very easily rob a fighter of his will to compete, but sometimes there's a little bit of dog left in natural-born fighters that pushes them to want to prove themselves.
We'll see about that on Saturday night. When it comes to the tough game, I mean, you haven't seen me give up in a fight. I wish we could say the same about him.
Unfortunately, Darren took Du Plessis' bait to fight him. When the fighter met in the octagon, Darren Till had some success against Dricus. He managed to do decently in striking exchanges, but ultimately succumbed to the pressure of Du Plessis' grappling ability. Till was submitted in the third round and hasn't fought in the UFC since. I guess you could say Dricus ended his career, but prior to his UFC run, Dricus ended another career, only in much more devastating fashion. At the time, Yannick Bahati vs Dricus Du Plessis was marketed as the biggest fight in Extreme Fighting Championships history. Both fighters represented the elite of the division, and there was a lot of tension leading into the matchup. In the early phases of his career, Dricus started to develop his personality using snide remarks and sneak dissing his opponents from time to time. Even though the mental warfare started before fights were even announced between his foes, he wasn't opposed to saying insults in their face either.
Me and Dricus, first guy started speaking is when I made my UFC debut, when this stupid geezer tweeted me about me losing my fight against Dalcha. Before I even fought the fight, he tweeted me saying something, something I can't remember, but he tweeted me anyway. So then when I fought Warren Allison, he constantly kept mugging me.
With more fans beginning to understand and see the physical gifts Du Plessis was endowed with, this became a sore point and source of insecurity for many of his opponents.
Do you think this fight is going to boil down to size or skill set on the net?
I believe I'm the
Hopefully size for him.
Well, I think it's been him and Mr. Opperman have been in the toilet together in stirred up the ass. That's what I heard. So that's where that 3 kilo came from. Do you know what I mean, though? But size doesn't matter, you know. This is a fight. I believe I've got more skill than him, and I'll put him away in the first and second round, you know. Look at the size of his head, you know. You can tell he's been enjoying started with Mr. Opperman.
Du Plessis was the good-looking, muscular high school jock who carried himself with esteem and presented himself as a professional, wearing suits and flashy attire to his press conferences. As a champion, this is to be expected and it's customary behavior. There was just a little something extra about Du Plessis' attitude.
He's dressed for his funeral already, because he knows he's gonna die already, so look at him, he's dressed. Or maybe he's dressed for me like a little bitch.
It's fair to say, when you start attacking the likes of your opponent's press conference attire, you may be suffering from a little bit of jealousy. It didn't help that Dricus typically laughed off and mocked such insults. It wasn't that Du Plessis wasn't pretending to not care. What rubbed fighters the wrong way was that he genuinely didn't care about what opponents said about him. Not being able to get under someone's skin can be bothersome, especially in a testosterone-filled sport like fighting.
Yeah, what are you walking up on? What are you walking up on?
In a setting like press conferences where fighters are to conduct themselves with decorum and leave the actual fighting for the ring, Dricus had already won the mental war before landing a punch when it mattered. Bahati's press conference emotions got the best of him, and this would cost him dearly. When both fighters finally got in the ring to fight, the emotional and desperate Bahati felt the wrath of the man known as DDP. Ironically, Dricus overwhelmed Bahati with his strength and size, submitting him by guillotine choke and putting an emphatic stamp on the rivalry. Quite frankly, Du Plessis' banter and insults up to this point were quite tame and measured. As you'll see in the next saga, Du Plessis had a much nastier and malicious side to him that fans grew to love and adore, but his opponents hated. In a rivalry that fight fans didn't really anticipate, Sean Strickland vs Dricus Du Plessis was one of the most controversial and polarizing fight build-ups in UFC history. However, the UFC didn't actually intend to make this matchup. DDP came off a shocking upset victory over Robert Whittaker, and it made sense for the UFC to make Du Plessis versus at the time champion Israel Adesanya. In a hateful grudge match that we'll discuss later in the video, Dricus had to reject the fight due to lingering injuries. This made room for Sean Strickland to fight for the middleweight title against the style bender.
Sean, you're the world champion!
Oh, look at this thing, man. I found this laying around, you guys. I'm going to keep it for a little bit.
I think you should. That fight against Israel, I mean, all three judges scored it 4 rounds to 1.
Strickland was on top of the world and achieved his dreams, ready to take on all corners. At first, there wasn't genuine beef between Strickland and Du Plessis. The fighters were cordial, and there was a mutual respect for each other's craft. However, this all changed at the 2024 seasonal press conference.
Every childhood memory you have is going to come back when I'm in there with you. Every single one. The one where you lie in bed at night, where your dad comes in and he beats the shit out of you.
I will take your fucking soul. You understand me, you fucking
Yeah, I got a nerve. I see I hit a nerve.
A child abuse victim. It's pretty taboo to mock another fighter about such circumstances.
My father, abusive alcoholic, drank, got into pills later on. Everything about him I hated.
Strickland has been very public about his childhood upbringing and the way his father treated him. Sharing this story and everything he overcame made Strickland relatable, but also vulnerable. This was of no concern to Dricus. He loved crossing the lines and never cared to be politically correct. The fight game is the fight game, and if someone has a problem, they can fight about it. Emotional and reactionary outbursts aren't only reserved for press conferences and face-offs, and clearly, Du Plessis' verbal insults hit Strickland where it hurts. In fact, it got so heated that they threw hands before the scheduled bout.
To move. Oh, and then,
wow.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
Out of nowhere. That's kind of crazy.
Even after the brawl, Strickland wasn't opposed to inflicting more damage on Dricus outside of the ring. He hated Du Plessis with a passion. Fortunately for fight fans and the UFC brass, there was no love lost when they finally fought in the octagon. In a highly contested championship bout, both fighters went to war, but Dricus secured the decision victory. At this point, Dricus Du Plessis was public enemy number 1 in the UFC middleweight division, and he couldn't pretend to be the nice guy anymore. Following his title win, an old grudge match would be revived as Israel Adesanya was determined to get back in the cage and claim what he lost. And this fight wasn't short of tears either. Nationalistic pride is what makes the UFC one of the most popular sports in the world. People of different races, creeds, and backgrounds can come together to watch fighters who represent their respective countries and have pride in those athletes. With Dricus being South African and pompous and Adesanya embracing his Nigerian heritage, it's natural these two would come to butt heads and develop a grudge against one another. Before fans knew these fighters to be the superstars they are today, Adesanya and Dricus' origin story actually began years ago.
So when we're sparring, I don't know if we did 2 rounds in one. It's so long ago as well. This is 2014. Yep, 2014. So long ago. I remember like on the grappling, he had me.
Both fighters disagreed on the nature of the sparring sessions and or what exactly transpired, but the style bender's hate for DDP started to heat up close to 10 years later. Fast forward years later, and at the peak of 3 African Kings era, in his snarky fashion, Dricus questioned the legitimacy of Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, and Adesanya as champions.
Well, I mean, did those belts ever go to Africa? As far as I know, it came to America and New Zealand. I'm going to take a belt to Africa. I'm the African fighter in the UFC. Myself and Cameron, we breathe the African air. We wake up in Africa every day. We train in Africa, we're African born, we're African raised. We still reside in Africa, we train out of Africa.
To dismiss Adesanya's heritage because he trained in New Zealand with city kickboxing coach Eugene Behrman rubbed Izzy the wrong way.
Fuck is this cracker to tell me who the fuck I am, who the fuck Kamaru is, who the fuck Ngannou is? I'm like, are you dumb?
Du Plessis' comments lacked any consideration for why a fighter like Adesanya would have to leave his homeland in the first place, ultimately seeking better economic opportunity and freedoms. At the same time, it wasn't Dricus' job to care about Adesanya's circumstances growing up and why he trained in New Zealand instead of Nigeria. Du Plessis had a fight to build, and if it meant antagonizing his opponent, then so be it. Tensions flared in a post-UFC 290 face-off where both fighters could finally speak their piece to one another.
You know, Israel dropped some N-words in there tonight.
So what was the racial? Who did? Who dropped the racial?
Israel was saying over and over, yeah. Dropping
He's black.
50 in-bombs.
Okay, he's black. Who gives a shit?
Adesanya's emotional response brought a smile to Dricus's face.
I am a man. I can cry and whoop your ass at the same time. I feel the love from the crowd. First time I fought here, 2-2-1.
The matchup was initially delayed because of the previously mentioned injury DDP suffered in training camp, but they were eventually able to lock horns. However, the post-fight face-off wasn't the end of the drama.
Bro, shut the fuck up. You don't even know anything about my story. You have no idea who the fuck I am.
I don't care about your story. I don't care about your story.
Listen, my father and myself had to wake up at 4 a.m. and clean the banks while my mom studies to be a nurse. You don't know my fucking story. Don't fucking speak of my story if you don't know my story.
I don't care.
I will show you who you are Sunday. So right now, shut the fuck up.
This was more than likely the first and probably last time UFC fans would see the style bender so vulnerable. The rivalry created a great divide between mixed martial arts fans.
I think if we're going to go strength-wise, I'm giving a strength advantage to obviously the physical specimen in Dricus.
Yeah.
You're going to go grappling-wise, I'm giving the edge to Dricus. And if we're going to go diversity in attacks and being able to style with the feints and everything, Izzy all day.
Team Izzy versus Team Du Plessis. Nigeria versus South Africa. With nationalistic pride and bragging rights on the line, the fighters stepped in the ring, and to Adesanya's demise, the real African came out on top. To turn insult into injury, Adesanya's close friend and fellow Nigerian champ at the time, Kamaru Usman, conceded that Dricus Du Plessis was now one of the four kings. Du Plessis' journey wasn't anything short of a malicious path full of jealous foes who wanted to see him fail. And if you want to watch more great videos about animosity and hatred between fighters, watch the video below about when cocky UFC fighters get humbled.